The American highway system is the lifeblood of the nation, a sprawling network of nearly 5 million miles of road. But on those long, lonely stretches of asphalt, late at night, when the world is asleep, things happen, things that can't be explained. Tonight we bring you 3 chilling stories from those haunted highways, stories from drivers who saw something they were never meant to see. Our first tale comes from the icy inclines of the Rocky Mountains, a place they call Black Ridge Pass.
Story number 1. The Ghosts of Black Ridge Pass. Black Ridge Pass in Colorado is a place truckers speak of with a certain respect. It's a treacherous snake of a road, known for sudden blizzards, rock slides, and a grim collection of roadside memorials. The old-timers have a rule: you don't challenge the pass in the dark when a storm is brewing. On one such night, a small convoy of semis and a single cross-country bus pulled over on a wide shoulder halfway up the mountain, agreeing to wait for the safety of daylight.
Inside the bus, which was parked at the front of the line, just feet from the cliff's edge, the passengers drifted into an uneasy sleep. The silence of the high altitude was absolute. That is, until a scream tore through the cabin. A young woman, heavily pregnant, had jolted awake, her face a mask of terror. "They're pushing us!" she cried out, her voice thin with panic. "There's a crowd of people outside. They're trying to push the bus over." A wave of confusion and tired groans passed through the passengers. The driver, a road-hardened veteran, dismissed it as a simple nightmare, a common occurrence on long, uncomfortable journeys. He calmly reassured the woman, and though she was still trembling, the bus eventually settled back into a tense quiet. Her terror, however, seemed to linger in the stale, recycled air.
Perhaps an hour later, a new sound emerged from the darkness. A soft, deliberate tap, tap, tap on the main door. Everyone heard it. With a surge of adrenaline, the driver cautiously opened the door to the biting cold. Standing there was a small boy, no older than 10, shivering uncontrollably in just a thin t-shirt and jeans.
He explained he'd gotten lost while searching for a stray calf. Fearing a beating from his father, he'd wandered until he saw the bus. He fell asleep near the warmth of its engine, but was woken by a terrifying vision. "I saw them," the boy stammered, his eyes darting towards the cliff. "A whole group of people. They came out of the woods, and they were all shouting and pushing on the bus. I got so scared. Please, can I just sleep on the floor until morning?" A deathly silence fell. The boy's dream was the pregnant woman's nightmare. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a confirmation. The driver wasted no time. He pulled the boy aboard, slammed the door, and fired up the engine. "We're leaving," he announced, his voice grim. "Now!" He gunned the engine and wrestled the bus back onto the asphalt, fleeing into the darkness. As dawn broke, they learned the horrifying truth. The semi-truck that had been parked directly behind them, in the very spot where the boy had been sleeping, had gone over the cliff during the night. The 2 dreams had been a warning, saving the lives of everyone on that bus. The passengers, shaken but grateful, collected a small fortune for the boy who had been their unwitting savior. A shared vision, a ghostly warning that saved dozens of lives. It proves that sometimes the spirits of a place are trying to help. But that's not always the case. Sometimes the phantoms of the highway aren't there to warn you. They're there for you. Our second story comes from a lone driver
who found himself on that very same pass during a violent storm. I was trying to outrun a storm system rolling over the Rockies. It was a fool's errand. By midnight, I was crawling up Black Ridge Pass in a torrential downpour, the road completely deserted. It was just me, my SUV, and the hypnotic rhythm of the windshield wipers. Then, my headlights caught something on the shoulder. It was a figure, completely obscured by a heavy, dark raincoat, standing with its thumb out. My first instinct was pity, but it was quickly overridden by the cardinal rule of the lone driver. You don't pick up strangers on a haunted mountain in the middle of a storm. With a pang of guilt, I sped past, leaving the figure to the mercy of the elements. I tried to shake the image from my head, but a profound unease settled over me. The solitude that had felt peaceful now felt menacing. A primal fear, cold and sharp, began to prickle at my skin. I reached the summit, the highest point on the pass, the wind howling outside my vehicle, and my heart stopped. It was there, again. The same figure, the same raincoat, the same outstretched thumb. It was impossible. There were no turnoffs, no way anyone could have beaten me to the summit. My guilt evaporated, replaced by pure ice-cold terror. I didn't slow down. I slammed my foot on the accelerator and shot past it, my mind screaming. I knew then that this was no ordinary person. The story wasn't over. As I came down the other side of the pass, just as the road began to level out into the safety of the plains, my headlights swept across the shoulder one last time. It was there, for a third time, waiting. My blood ran cold. The goosebumps I felt turned into a full-body tremor. I snatched the small cross from my rearview mirror and didn't look back. I drove with my foot pressed to the floor, not letting up until the sun began to rise, and the memory of Black Ridge Pass was miles behind me. Some things that wait for you on the road, you don't ever want to find out what happens if you stop. A phantom that stalks its victims across miles of desolate highway is a terrifying thought. It suggests a malevolence tied to the road itself. But sometimes the danger isn't on the road, it's what the road leads you to. Our third story is about two friends on a cross-country trip who made the mistake of stopping for the night in a place that didn't want them there, a place with a hunger of its own. Jake and Marcus were gearheads. They had spent the better part of a year in their Detroit garage, sinking every spare dollar and moment into a custom-built truck. Their goal was to haul it out west and compete in a brutal off-road race in the Nevada desert. They decided to drive the final leg themselves, taking US Route 50, a stretch of road so barren and isolated, it's been nicknamed the loneliest road in America. As night fell, the immense emptiness of the Great Basin Desert became oppressive. They were exhausted. Seeing a wide, flat dirt mound by the side of the road, they decided to pull over and catch a few hours of sleep. It seemed as good a place as any. They cracked the windows slightly for air and leaned their seats back. Marcus was out like a light in minutes, but Jake drifted in a hazy state between wakefulness and sleep. That's when he saw it. A hand. Pale and thin, it was trying to snake through the 2-inch gap in his window, fingers straining to reach the lock. Jake wasn't the type to scare easy. He was big, tough, and had been in his share of fights. His reaction was pure instinct. With a guttural yell, he swung his elbow as hard as he could towards the window. But he hit nothing. The hand vanished an instant before impact. Instead, his elbow slammed into the hard glass of the window with a sickening thud, sending a jolt of sharp pain up his arm. He cursed, shaking his throbbing arm and peering out into the night. There was no one there. The empty desert stretched out in every direction under the cold moonlight. Marcus snorted in his sleep, undisturbed. Must have been dreaming, Jake muttered to himself, though he didn't believe it. He rolled the window up all the way, the electronic hum sounding unnervingly loud in the silence.
He had just started to drift off again when a thunderous bang on the side of the truck jolted him upright. This time, Marcus woke up too. "What the hell was that?" he mumbled. Jake's blood ran cold. He saw them now. Two figures outside his window. The pale man from before, in a striped shirt, and another, broader man dressed in black. They were pounding on the glass, their movements frantic and aggressive. This time, Jake was furious. Thinking they were being messed with by some local troublemakers, he threw the door open, ready to fight. "Hey, what's your problem?" he yelled. And once again, there was nothing. They had vanished into thin air. The only sound was the wind whistling over the desert. Now Marcus was scared too. "I didn't see anyone, Jake," he whispered, his voice trembling. Nobody was there.
They didn't need any more convincing. They fled that spot, driving until they found the sanctuary of a brightly lit 24-hour gas station. They tried to sleep in the cab under the buzzing fluorescent lights, but the fear was too deep. They spent the rest of the night in the station's all-night coffee shop, waiting for the sun. Morning came, and with it, a new problem. In his exhaustion and panic, Jake had locked the keys inside the truck. After an hour of failing to jimmy the lock, he decided to break the small rear window. He borrowed a hammer and grabbed a rock, slamming it against the tempered glass with all his might. It wouldn't break. It was as if the truck itself didn't want to let them back on the road. Finally, Marcus took the rock from him. "Let me try," he said. He gave the glass a couple of light taps, as if finding the right spot, then swung. The window exploded into a shower of tiny cubes. They were back on the road, but the bad luck wasn't over. With the rear window gone, Jake drove slower, telling Marcus to go on ahead. But Marcus forgot and soon disappeared over the horizon. Jake was driving along what looked like a perfectly straight stretch of road when the world suddenly tilted violently. He had driven straight off the road into a ravine. By some miracle, a hidden ledge just 10 feet below the road's edge caught the truck, flipping it onto its roof, but stopping it from plunging hundreds of feet to the bottom. Later, after he was rescued, Jake asked Marcus how he knew to come back. There was no cell service for miles. Marcus's answer was chilling. "I don't know, man," he said. "It was weird. I suddenly heard your voice, clear as day, like you were screaming my name right in my ear. It was a cry for help that traveled miles across the empty desert. Another unexplained event on a journey that started on a haunted patch of dirt on the loneliest road in America. A voice that carries on the wind, a warning from a friend in peril. That connection saved a life. But our next story is about a different kind of omen. It's about what happens when you see that someone's time is up, when you can look at a loved one and see the shadow of death already resting on their shoulders. This is a story I learned from my wife's family. It's not about a ghost in the traditional sense, but it's one of the most profoundly unsettling things I've ever heard. A little over a year ago, my wife's cousin, Daniel, lost his sister-in-law, a woman named Maria, in a tragic accident. She was a kind woman, a mother to several young children, and her death sent a shockwave of grief through the family. My wife and I went to the viewing, held in a small, somber house in a quiet Ohio suburb.
After paying our respects, we sat outside with Daniel. He was shattered. He kept staring into space, replaying the events that led to the tragedy. And then he told us a story that made the hair on my arms stand up. The day of the accident, Maria had planned to visit a friend across town. She insisted that Daniel go and retrieve her specific old moped for the trip, even though there was a newer, safer car available at the house.
She just had to have that specific bike, Daniel said, his voice cracking. She said it was the only one she was comfortable with. Reluctantly, he went and got the moped for her. But when he brought it back and looked at his sister-in-law, a wave of absolute terror washed over him.
Her face, he whispered, his eyes wide with the memory. It was gray. Not like she was sick, but like all the life, all the color had been drained out of her. Her expression was empty. It was like I wasn't looking at her anymore, but at a hollow shell. It was the face of someone who was already gone. The sight horrified him so deeply he felt a primal urge to scream at her, to tell her not to go, to lock her in the house.
But the sight of that vacant gray face paralyzed him. He was too terrified to speak. He dropped the keys on the table and fled the house, running back to his own home, his heart pounding in his chest. He was still shaking when the phone call came a few hours later. Maria, riding that old moped, had been struck and killed by a semi-truck at a busy intersection.
Daniel then told us the most chilling part. His grandfather, years ago, had the same sight. He had once looked at a relative and seen the same gray, lifeless mask, and that person had died unexpectedly within days. It was a terrible, unwelcome premonition that had been passed down from his grandfather to him. I don't know what to believe, but sitting there listening to this young man's grief-stricken, terrified confession, I couldn't help but wonder, do the condemned know their time is up? Or, even more terrifyingly, can others sometimes see the reaper's shadow long before he swings his scythe? A premonition of death is a terrifying glimpse into a fate that's already sealed. It suggests that cosmic gears are turning, and we are powerless to stop them. But our next story asks a different question. What happens to the spirits of those who die tragically on the road, far from home? What tethers them to this world? This is the legend of Orphan's Point, a grim tale from the days when the Pacific Coast Highway was a far more dangerous and desolate place.
Before the modern highway expansions of the 80s and 90s, the drive along the California coast was a perilous affair. The road was narrow, the cliffs were unforgiving, and help was often hours away. The legend of Orphan's Point was born on such a road, sometime in the mid-70s. A charter bus was making its way south to Los Angeles when its engine sputtered and died on a particularly remote stretch. There, against a backdrop of crashing waves and jagged rocks, the bus and its passengers were stranded.
As the hours dragged on, a personal tragedy unfolded inside the bus. A young mother traveling with her 3-year-old son watched in horror as he succumbed to a sudden, violent fever. With no access to medicine or a doctor, the child passed away in her arms. Grief turned to horror as the other passengers, trapped, hot, and increasingly superstitious, began to murmur. They believed the presence of the dead child was a curse, the reason the bus wouldn't start, the reason they were trapped in this desolate place.
In a horrifying display of fear and cruelty, they forced the grieving mother and her child's body off the bus. They told her she could not travel with them any further. In that era,
Another bus might not pass for days. Stranded and heartbroken, the mother pleaded, begging them to at least let her keep her son's body with her. They refused, but offered a cruel compromise. She could leave the body and reboard the bus alone.
Faced with an impossible choice, she did the only thing she could to protect her son's body from wild animals. She carried him to the largest, flattest rock at the point, a natural stone altar overlooking the sea, and laid him there. She then rejoined the bus in a state of shock. Miraculously, moments later, the engine roared back to life, and the bus continued its journey, leaving the tiny form behind.
The story doesn't end there. When the mother finally earned enough money to hire a private car to return and retrieve her son, she found the impossible had happened. The child's body had become fused to the stone. It could not be moved. The legend says the very rock itself claimed the boy, refusing to let him go. Defeated, she covered him with smaller stones, creating the first tomb on that point. For years, truckers and locals who knew the story would say that any vehicle carrying even a single passenger from that original cursed bus would stall at that exact spot. They began leaving flowers, candles, and toys, creating a makeshift shrine. Eventually, the road was widened and the rock was blasted away, but those who know the history of the coast say the spirit of that abandoned child still waits at Orphan's Point, listening for the sound of his mother's return. A spirit tethered to a place by grief is a powerful, tragic force. But our final story tonight is about a different kind of haunting. It's not about a ghost tied to a location, but one that actively seeks out a vessel to carry on its unfinished business. This story was told to me by a man whose father drove a bus route through the bayous of Louisiana in the early 90s, a time when a careless word could invite a darkness you never knew existed.
I was 13 when it happened. My dad drove a charter bus, mostly running routes between New Orleans and Mobile. It was the summer of '91, and he'd taken me along for a trip. On the way back from a charter run to the small town of Port Rivo, we stopped to stretch our legs at an old Catholic cemetery. It was a beautiful and eerie place with elaborate tombs draped in Spanish moss. Dad went in to light a candle, a habit of his.
His assistant, a lanky kid named Billy Sidewinder Jones, was wandering through the graves. He stopped at a particular tomb where people had left photos of the deceased. Billy picked up a framed picture of a pretty girl, about 18 years old. "What a shame," Billy said with a disrespectful laugh. "Too pretty to die so young. I'd have shown her a good time." My dad overheard him. "Don't talk like that, Billy," he said sharply. "Show some respect." Billy just shrugged and tossed the photo back onto the tomb. We got back on the road. Billy was quiet, which was unusual for him. He didn't help with the luggage or joke with the few remaining passengers. He just sat in a seat directly behind my father, staring blankly ahead. Dad, thinking he was just tired or sulking, didn't say anything. For the first time, he let me act as the assistant, collecting the last few fares. We were driving alongside a canal, almost to the Port Rivo parish line, when Billy suddenly spoke, his voice flat and strange. "Driver, let me off here." My dad glanced in the mirror. "Are you crazy, Billy? We're in the middle of nowhere. I'll drop you at your house." Billy's response was chillingly calm. "You're upsetting me, sir." My dad fell silent. Without another word, he pulled the bus over. Billy stood up, walked off the bus, and turned down a small dirt path leading away from the road. My dad and I got out and followed him from a distance.
After about 500 yards, Billy turned and walked directly up to a small, weathered farmhouse. He walked onto the porch as an older couple came to the screen door. Then Billy spoke in a voice that was not his own. It was lighter, softer. "Ma! Pa! I'm home!" The couple stared, speechless. Who are you, son?" the farmer finally stammered. Billy tilted his head. "It's only been a few days. Don't you recognize your own daughter?" The woman gasped and put her hand to her mouth. Billy, or the thing inside him, then turned to my father. "Sir, what's the fare for the trip?" My dad was stunned. "What are you talking about, Billy?" The voice replied, "My name is Rosalie."
My father, knowing he couldn't leave his passengers waiting, got the couple's phone number and promised to return the next day. The story Billy's body told was true. This was the home of the girl in the photograph. The next morning, my dad, the girl's parents, and I took Billy to the old church. The priest listened to the story, then prepared a simple meal and began to pray over a kneeling Billy. After moments of intense prayer, Billy suddenly blinked and looked around, completely bewildered. "What's going on?" he asked, his own voice returning. "Why is everyone staring? Why am I in a church?" The spirit of Rosalie was gone. Billy never joked in a graveyard again. Possession. It's a terrifying violation. A spirit forcing its way into the vessel of a living person. It's a direct, aggressive form of haunting. But sometimes the most profound horror isn't in what attacks you, but in what you see. A brief, sanity-shattering glimpse into something that the human mind was never meant to comprehend. Our next story is about a group of friends on a road trip, and how one of them saw something in the depths of Whispering Canyon. It was the last leg of a cross-country road trip with 4 of my closest friends. We were driving through Arizona, and at around 3 a.m., we stopped at a scenic overlook for Whispering Canyon. The air was crisp and cool, and the view was absolutely stunning. Under the light of a brilliant full moon, the canyon was a masterpiece of silver and shadow. We were all laughing, taking pictures, feeling on top of the world. All of us, except one.
My friend Mike had wandered off to the side to relieve himself near the edge of the parking lot, which looked directly down into the darkest part of the ravine. A moment later, we heard him make a strange, choked sound. We turned to see him scrambling back towards the car, his movements frantic and clumsy. He tore the car door open, threw himself inside, and slammed it shut, locking it immediately.
We were all baffled. We ran to the car, trying to ask him what was wrong. When I looked at his face through the window, I felt a jolt of genuine fear. His skin was pale, almost translucent, with a sickly greenish tint, like a rotting leaf. He was shaking so violently, the entire car seemed to vibrate. He wouldn't answer us, wouldn't even look at us. He just stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched, his eyes filled with a terror so profound it seemed to have burned out any other emotion.
Leaving me to try and calm him down, the other 3 guys ran over to where Mike had been standing, peering down into the canyon, trying to see what he had seen. They saw nothing, just rocks, shadows, and the endless silent drop. For the rest of the trip back to Los Angeles, Mike didn't speak a single word. He wouldn't eat. He just drank water and stared. He spent the next week in bed, sick with a fever and a terror he refused to name. It was only much later that he finally said, "I saw a ghost down there. Don't ever ask me about it again." To this day, I have no idea what he truly saw in the depths of that canyon, but I know this: the image was so horrifying, it almost broke him. The fear of the unknown is a powerful thing, but our final story tonight is about the opposite. It's about a horror that is seen all too clearly, an encounter so direct, so undeniable, it nearly ends in catastrophe. This story comes from a man whose parents, on a quiet afternoon drive, came face to face with a phantom who had no intention of letting them pass.
My father loved his old convertible. On a beautiful afternoon about 5 years ago, he was taking my mother for a drive through the countryside, the top down, the air warm. They were cruising along at a relaxed pace when my mother suddenly leaned over to him, her voice a low, urgent whisper. "Honey, slow down. Be careful. There's an old man walking in the road, coming right towards us."
My father scanned the road ahead. He saw nothing, just the empty sun-dappled asphalt. He figured my mother's eyes were playing tricks on her and kept driving at the same speed. Less than a minute later, my mother screamed, a raw, piercing sound of pure panic. "Stop! Why aren't you stopping? You're going to hit him!" As she screamed, she acted on pure instinct. One hand grabbed my father's arm, while the other yanked the steering wheel hard to the side. The car, now out of my father's control, swerved sharply, its tires screeching as it veered directly into the path of oncoming traffic.
At that exact moment, a large passenger bus came around the curve. The bus driver, miraculously, had the reflexes of a god. He slammed on the brakes, and the massive vehicle fishtailed with a deafening roar of tortured rubber, stopping less than a foot from my parents' car. Passengers were thrown from their seats. The bus driver, his face as white as a sheet, jumped out. "Are you people crazy?" he yelled, his voice shaking. "What in God's name were you thinking, swerving into my lane like that?"
My father apologized profusely, then asked the bus driver, "Did you see him? Did you see the old man in the road?" The driver just stared at him. "What old man? There was nobody on this road but you and me." A heated argument erupted between my parents, right there on the roadside. My father insisted there was nothing there, that her panic had almost gotten them both killed. But my mother was unshakable. She described him in vivid detail. A stooped man in old dirty overalls, a faded cap, leaning on a wooden cane, who never looked up and who was about to be hit when she yanked the wheel. She saw him. No one else did. They argued about it for a week, but eventually, a cold realization settled in. My mother hadn't been trying to cause an accident. She had been reacting to a phantom sent to do just that, and by nearly killing them, she had somehow saved their lives. A phantom pedestrian, a possessed bus assistant, a spirit tethered to a lonely rock. These are the stories that are born on the road. They remind us that these ribbons of asphalt we travel every day are not as new as they seem. They cut through ancient lands, places with long histories and even longer memories. So the next time you're driving late at night on a quiet stretch of highway and you see something in the distance, remember these stories. Remember that you are never truly alone out there. The ghosts of the highway are always watching.